The worst part about losing my farm wasn't the fire. It was hearing my own son ask if I had somewhere else to go. By the time the volunteer fire department got the last of the flames under control, the sky above my property looked the color of old bruises. Smoke rolled across the empty pasture in slow gray waves while the wooden frame of my barn crackled and collapsed into itself. I stood there in my winter coat and mud-covered boots, gripping the handle of a shovel I hadn't used in over an hour, staring at the place I had lived for 42 years. The Whitmore farm had survived droughts, blizzards, cattle sickness, and one tornado back in 1998 that tore half the fencing out of the ground. But that night, in less than 3 hours, most of it was gone. My chickens had been rescued by neighbors. The horses made it out safely. But the equipment shed, the grain storage, and the old red barn my husband built with his own hands were burned down to black skeletons and ash. I remember Sheriff Dawson walking over slowly, removing his gloves, and speaking in that careful voice people use around the elderly. "Margaret, you got somewhere warm tonight?" I nodded even though I didn't. Pride makes liars out of people sometimes. My son Eric arrived 20 minutes later in his silver SUV with Diane sitting in the passenger seat holding a paper coffee cup like she was driving through a movie set instead of her husband's family farm. Diane stepped out first. Her boots barely touched the mud. She looked around at the smoke, then at me, then back at the house. "Oh my God," she whispered, though there was something strangely hollow in the way she said it. Eric hugged me quickly with one arm before pulling back. "Mom, are you okay?" I told him I was alive, and for a few seconds nobody spoke. The cold wind pushed smoke across the yard while firefighters rolled hoses through puddles of black water. Then Diane quietly asked the first question that made my stomach tighten. "Do you know how much insurance will cover?" I looked at her, thinking maybe I had heard wrong. But she was already staring at the remains of the barn like she was mentally adding numbers together. Eric rubbed the back of his neck. "Diane's just worried about you financially, Mom." Financially. That word floated in the air while my husband's workshop still smoldered behind us. I wanted someone to ask if I was hurting, if I'd eaten, if I needed a blanket. Instead, my daughter-in-law was calculating acreage in her head while smoke still rose from the ruins of my life. The firefighters finally cleared out close to midnight. Sheriff Dawson offered to drive me to a motel in town, but before I could answer, Diane spoke up again. "Honestly, Margaret, maybe this is a sign." I turned toward her slowly. "A sign of what?" She crossed her arms tighter against the cold. "That maybe it's time to stop trying to handle all this alone. The farm is too much for one person at your age." At your age. Funny how people start talking to you differently once your hair turns white. As if surviving long enough to grow old somehow makes you less human. Eric avoided my eyes. That hurt worse than Diane speaking. My husband used to say silence can betray you louder than words. Standing there beside the ashes of our barn, I finally understood what he meant. Diane walked closer and lowered her voice. "You could always stay with us temporarily." "Well, depending on space. Tyler already uses the guest room now." "Temporarily. Depending on space." I nodded slowly even though something deep inside me had already started breaking apart. This wasn't concern. This was repositioning. Rearranging. The kind people do when they've already decided your old life is over. As we loaded a few salvaged boxes into the back of Eric's SUV, I caught Diane holding her phone low beside her coat. She was recording. Not the fire. Me. Just for a second. But I saw it. And later that night, lying awake in a cheap motel room that smelled like bleach and old carpet, I learned why. Because sometime after midnight, Diane uploaded a video online with soft piano music and the caption, "Hard watching family go through financial hardship. Please keep us in your prayers." Us. Not me. By morning, half the town had seen it. And by lunchtime, my own grandson would ask me a question that would change everything. "Grandma, are you homeless now?" The first time someone looks at you with pity instead of love, you feel it in your bones before you understand it in your mind. The motel room smelled like old coffee and laundry detergent that never quite covered the scent of cigarettes trapped inside the walls. I woke up before sunrise because I had forgotten where I was. For one quiet second, I thought I was still home on the farm, that I would hear the horses outside and the creaking sound of Harold's old windmill turning in the morning breeze. Then I opened my eyes and saw the water stain on the motel ceiling above me. Reality returned all at once. The fire. The smoke. The barn collapsing. Diane recording me beside the ashes like I was part of some sad internet story she could decorate with soft music and fake sympathy. I sat up slowly and checked my phone. 37 notifications. Church friends. Neighbors. Women I had not spoken to in years. Most of them sent prayers. Some asked if there was a donation page. One message from an old friend simply said, "Margaret, I am so sorry your family is handling this publicly." Publicly. That word sat heavy in my chest. I clicked on Diane's video again even though I knew I should not. There I was in the background wearing my smoke-covered coat, standing beside the burned remains of my barn while sad piano music played over captions about family hardship. Thousands of views overnight. Comments from strangers calling Diane an angel for supporting her elderly mother-in-law. I almost laughed at that. Around 8 that morning, Eric texted me. "Tyler wants to see you before school." I stared at the message for a long time before replying yes. When I arrived at their house 20 minutes later, Diane opened the front door wearing expensive cream-colored loungewear like she was about to host a daytime television segment instead of welcoming a woman who had lost everything. "Hey, Margaret," she said softly, using that careful voice people use when they want credit for being kind. "We were just talking about you." Of course they were. Tyler came running downstairs in mismatched socks, holding a cereal bowl against his chest. He was only 9, still young enough that honesty came out before manners. "Grandma," he asked quietly, "are you homeless now?" The room went still. Eric looked down at the kitchen counter while Diane quickly stepped in with a nervous laugh. "Tyler, honey, that is not appropriate." But the damage was already done. I looked at my grandson and forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Grandma just needs somewhere temporary while things get figured out." Tyler nodded slowly, accepting the answer the way children do, then wandered back toward the living room. Diane sighed dramatically once he was gone. "Kids hear things online," she explained. "People have been asking questions because of the video." The video. Not the fire. Not my life. The video. I sat at their kitchen table while Diane poured herself a green juice and Eric scrolled silently through emails on his phone. Finally Diane sat down across from me and folded her hands together. "Margaret, we need to have an honest conversation." I knew those words. Honest conversation usually means someone already made a decision without you. "The farm situation is bigger than we expected," she continued. "Repairs alone could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars." Eric finally spoke. "Maybe this is the right time to sell the land." I stared at him. "Sell it?" He shrugged weakly. "Mom, you cannot run that place alone anymore." I wanted to remind him that I already had. 4 years. After Harold died, after the cattle prices dropped, after my arthritis started settling into my hands every winter. I had managed every inch of that farm while Eric lived in climate-controlled offices wearing polished shoes that had never touched manure or frozen mud. But Diane leaned forward before I could answer. "You could simplify your life. Maybe get a condo near us. Something manageable." Manageable. Another word people use when they think old age should come with smaller dreams. I looked around the kitchen and noticed something strange. On the counter sat several printed real estate pages with photos of my land highlighted in yellow marker. Acre estimates. Property values. Development projections. Diane noticed my eyes land on them and quickly stacked the papers together. Too quickly. "We were only researching options," she said. But I had lived long enough to recognize greed when it entered a room. It never arrives loudly at first. It comes dressed as concern. That afternoon, Eric drove me back to the motel. Before I got out of the SUV, he kept both hands on the steering wheel and spoke quietly. "Diane thinks maybe staying here long-term is not the best idea." I looked at him carefully. "Do you think that?" He did not answer immediately. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. When I walked back into the motel room later that evening, I noticed one small cardboard box sitting near the dresser. The motel manager said a firefighter had recovered it from my bedroom closet after the fire. Smoke stains covered the edges, but the contents inside had survived. Old photographs. Christmas cards. Letters. Memories people forget until they almost disappear forever. And buried beneath all of it was an envelope with a name I had not seen in over 20 years. Nathaniel Cole. Some names do not belong to your past. They wait quietly for the exact moment your life falls apart before they return and change everything. I sat alone on the edge of the motel bed holding the smoke-stained envelope in both hands while the old heater rattled beside the window. Outside, snow had started falling across the parking lot in thin drifting lines, covering patches of dirty ice near the vending machines. The envelope smelled faintly like ash and cedar wood, like pieces of the farm had somehow survived inside it. My fingers trembled as I turned it over and saw the handwriting on the back. Nathaniel. Even after all those years, I recognized the sharp slant of his letters immediately. Some people leave fingerprints on your memory that time never fully erases. I slowly opened the envelope and unfolded a single card inside. The edges were yellow with age. To the only mother I ever knew. Merry Christmas. Love always, Nathaniel. I closed my eyes the second I read it. Suddenly, I was no longer sitting in a motel room at 6 to 7 years old. I was 39 again, standing in my kitchen on a freezing January morning while a thin 14-year-old boy sat at my table. Eating pancakes like he had not seen a real breakfast in weeks. Nathaniel Cole first came into my life because the county social worker asked if I could temporarily watch him after school while his father dealt with personal matters. Around town, everybody knew what those words actually meant. His father drank too much, disappeared for days, and left that boy alone more often than not. Nathaniel barely spoke during those first few months. He carried all his belongings in one backpack and apologized every time he ate dinner at our house like taking up space made him guilty somehow. Harold used to leave extra portions on purpose because the poor child always acted ashamed of being hungry. Over time, he became part of our routine. He fed horses before school. Helped repair fences on weekends. Sat with Eric at the kitchen table doing homework while I cooked chili or cornbread after long days outside. I remember one winter night when the power went out during a snowstorm and Nathaniel quietly admitted he used to pretend our farm was his real home. Harold never said much after that confession. He simply walked over and handed the boy an extra blanket from the hallway closet. Some people show love loudly. My husband showed it through small acts nobody else noticed. I had not seen Nathaniel in over 20 years. After college, he left Montana and slowly disappeared into the kind of world people like us only hear about on television. Technology companies. Business magazines. Interviews in New York and San Francisco. I remembered seeing his face once on a financial news channel years ago while waiting for weather reports. Nathaniel Cole becomes youngest billionaire in tech acquisition. I had nearly dropped my coffee mug when his picture appeared on screen. Same blue eyes. Same quiet expression. Just older. Sharper. Untouchable. I smiled proudly that day and then turned the television off because I assumed men like him no longer remembered old women on farms in Montana. But sitting there in that motel room, holding the Christmas card he wrote decades ago, I realized he had remembered enough to send it in the first place. Beneath the card was another folded piece of paper. An old phone number written in blue ink. Los Angeles area code. My heart started pounding harder than it should have. I stared at the number for nearly 10 minutes before reaching for the motel phone. Then I stopped. What exactly was I doing? Calling a billionaire I had not spoken to since he was a teenager. The idea sounded ridiculous the moment I said it out loud. I hung up before even dialing. But later that evening, Diane posted another video. This one hurt worse. She filmed herself standing in front of my burned property wearing a beige wool coat and speaking softly into the camera. It is heartbreaking watching family lose everything, she said while dramatic music played underneath her voice. Sometimes people refuse help because of pride, especially older generations. Older generations. Like I was some stubborn antique instead of a human being sitting in a motel room watching my daughter-in-law turn my grief into social media attention. Then came the comments. She should move into assisted living. Poor family dealing with this burden. At least her son is trying. Burden. I read that word 3 times. Something inside me finally hardened after that. Not anger exactly. Clarity. I reached for the motel phone again and slowly dialed the number from the paper. 1 ring. 2 rings. Then a woman answered in a polished professional voice. Office of Nathaniel Cole. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Hello, I said quietly. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I know this probably sounds strange, but I used to care for Nathaniel many years ago. There was a brief pause. Keyboard typing in the background. Then the woman replied politely, Mr. Cole is unavailable at the moment. May I ask what this concerns? I almost hung up again. Pride still whispered that I should not do this. But then I remembered Diane calling me a burden while standing in my own ashes. Please just tell him Margaret from Whitmore Farm called, I said softly. Silence. A longer silence this time. Then I heard another voice suddenly enter the line far away from the receiver. Deep. Calm. Familiar in a way that made my chest ache. Did you say Margaret Whitmore? There are moments in life when one sentence changes the temperature of your entire world. Hearing Nathaniel's voice again after 20 years felt exactly like that. I gripped the motel phone tighter while my heart pounded hard enough to make my hands shake. Nathaniel, I whispered. There was another pause on the line, but this one felt different. Warmer somehow. Emotional. Then he spoke again, slower this time. Mrs. Whitmore? Nobody had called me that with genuine affection in a very long time. Tears rushed into my eyes before I could stop them. It is me, I said softly. I hope I am not bothering you. I heard movement in the background and muffled voices before silence settled again. Bothering me, he repeated quietly. I have spent years trying to find you. I closed my eyes. In the motel room, snow tapped lightly against the window while that sentence echoed through me. Trying to find me. Not forgotten. Not erased. Not inconvenient. For the first time since the fire, I felt something besides exhaustion. Nathaniel asked me what happened, and I told him the truth. Not every detail. Just enough. The fire. The motel. The insurance delays. Losing the barn Harold built with his own hands. I never mentioned Diane directly, but smart people do not need every sentence explained to understand pain hiding between words. He listened without interrupting once. Then finally he asked, Where are you staying? I hesitated. Just a small motel outside Billings. His tone changed immediately. Calm. Controlled. Decisive. You should not be there. I almost laughed softly. Well, unfortunately the Four Seasons was unavailable. To my surprise, Nathaniel laughed too. The same quiet laugh he had as a teenager sitting at my kitchen table after Harold made terrible jokes during dinner. Some sounds survive time better than faces do. Then his voice turned serious again. Margaret, listen to me carefully. I am sending someone for you tomorrow morning. I sat upright. Oh no, Nathaniel, that is not necessary. Yes, he said firmly. It is. The confidence in his voice stunned me into silence. You took care of me when nobody else did, he continued. Please allow me to return the favor. I looked around. The motel room. The faded curtains. The broken ice machine outside. My single suitcase resting beside the bed. Pride still whispered that I should refuse. But another voice inside me, quieter and wiser, finally asked something important. Why was I fighting so hard to protect people who had no problem watching me struggle? Nathaniel spoke again before I could answer. I already arranged everything. Everything? I repeated carefully. A car will pick you up at 9 tomorrow morning. I also booked a suite for you tonight at the Grand Northern downtown. I nearly dropped the phone. Nathaniel, absolutely not. That sounds expensive. Margaret, he said gently, you once spent your grocery money buying me winter boots because my father forgot. Please let me do this. The memory hit me immediately. Nathaniel at 15 years old pretending his sneakers were fine while snow soaked through the soles. Harold driving him into town the next morning for proper boots while I argued over spending extra money before Christmas. Funny the things people remember decades later. We spoke for nearly 40 minutes after that. About Harold. About the farm. About life. Nathaniel told me he lived mostly between Chicago and New York now, though he traveled constantly for business. He never married. Said work consumed too much of his life. But when he talked about the old farm, his voice softened in a way that made him sound young again. Before hanging up, he quietly asked one final question. Do you still make cinnamon bread on Sunday mornings? I smiled through tears. Only when somebody worth baking for visits. He laughed softly again. Good. Then I will come hungry. After the call ended, I sat motionless on the edge of the motel bed for a long time. Outside, the snowstorm grew heavier, covering the parking lot in fresh white layers. For the first time in days, I slept without waking every hour. The next morning at exactly 8:45, a black luxury SUV pulled into the motel parking lot. Not rented. Driven. The driver stepped out wearing a dark overcoat and leather gloves before politely introducing himself. Mrs. Whitmore? My name is Daniel. Mr. Cole sent me. The motel. Manager nearly choked on her coffee watching him carry my luggage outside. Two women smoking near the vending machines stopped talking entirely as the SUV door opened for me. I had spent days feeling invisible. Suddenly everyone was staring. As we drove through town, my phone would not stop vibrating. Messages from church friends. Curious neighbors. Even Eric called twice. I ignored every notification until one text from Diane appeared on the screen. What is going on? Someone said a private car picked you up. Not are you okay? Not where are you staying? Just curiosity mixed with panic. I looked out the tinted window at the snowy Montana streets passing by and felt something shift quietly inside me. Diane thought she understood power because she followed wealthy people online and staged sympathy videos for strangers. But real power moved differently. Quietly. Efficiently. Without needing attention. When we arrived downtown, Daniel opened the hotel entrance doors while staff greeted me by name before I even reached the front desk. Name. Not burden. Not problem. Not homeless. That alone nearly broke my heart. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. Because while I stood in the marble lobby trying to process everything around me, every television screen inside the hotel suddenly switched to the same breaking business headline. And there he was. Nathaniel Cole. Standing beside the President of the United States. Sometimes the people who treat you like you are small have no idea who still remembers your kindness. I stood frozen in the hotel lobby staring at the television screen while reporters crowded around Nathaniel outside the White House gates. The headline running across the bottom read, Cole Technologies announces historic national infrastructure partnership. Even at 6 to 7 years old, I understood enough to know that kind of headline belonged to people who moved entire industries with a phone call. Nathaniel looked calm standing behind the microphones in a dark navy coat while cameras flashed around him. He answered questions confidently, but what shocked me most was not the money or attention surrounding him. It was the expression on his face. Underneath the polished businessman the world admired, I still saw the quiet boy who used to sit on my porch steps feeding sugar cubes to horses after school. Mrs. Whitmore? A hotel employee approached carefully with a warm smile. Your suite is ready. I nodded, still distracted by the television. The suite itself looked bigger than the first house Harold and I rented after we got married. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Billings while snow drifted softly across the streets below. Fresh flowers sat near the dining table beside a handwritten card. You are safe now. Rest. Nathaniel. 3 simple sentences. But I cannot explain what it feels like to hear the word safe after spending days feeling unwanted. I sat slowly on the edge of the bed and looked around the room in disbelief. Nobody had ever done anything like this for me before. Not because they expected something in return. Not because they wanted social media attention. Just kindness. Quiet, immediate kindness. My phone buzzed again. Diane. Third time in 2 hours. This time she left a voicemail. Margaret, people are saying some businessman picked you up from the motel. Eric and I are getting really concerned. Please call us back. Concerned. Funny how concern suddenly appears once expensive vehicles enter the story. I deleted the voicemail without responding. About an hour later, room service arrived with soup, fresh bread, tea, and a slice of apple pie. I nearly cried at the smell alone. Not because the food was fancy, but because somebody remembered I had not properly eaten in days. While I was pouring tea, the hotel room phone rang softly. Hello. Did they finally feed you? Nathaniel's voice carried gentle amusement through the line. I laughed before I could stop myself. You always did know when I skipped meals. That is because you used to know every time I lied about being hungry. I sat beside the window while snow continued falling outside. For the next hour we talked more than we had during the previous 20 years combined. Nathaniel asked about Harold's passing. About the farm. About the horses. He remembered details I had forgotten myself. The old tire swing near the creek. The cinnamon bread every Sunday morning. The chipped mug Harold refused to throw away because he claimed coffee tasted better in it. Your house was the only peaceful place I knew growing up, Nathaniel admitted quietly. I do not think I ever thanked you properly for that. I looked down at my hands. Hands rough from decades of farm work and Montana winters. You were just a boy who needed stability. No, he corrected softly. I was a boy nobody wanted responsibility for. There is a difference. His words settled heavily between us because I understood exactly what he meant. Families have a strange way of making people feel temporary when they become inconvenient. Nathaniel suddenly cleared his throat. Margaret, I hope you do not mind, but I asked my team to start reviewing your insurance situation. I blinked in surprise. You did not need to do that. Probably not, he admitted. But I wanted to. There was a pause before he continued carefully. Some numbers are not making sense. My stomach tightened slightly. What do you mean? Nothing definitive yet, he said calmly. But there were policy changes made shortly before the fire. My fingers slowly tightened around the teacup. Policy changes? I do not want you worried before I have full information, he replied. Just let my people look into it. My mind immediately drifted toward Eric and Diane sitting at their kitchen table surrounded by printed property estimates only hours after the fire. Something cold moved quietly through my chest. Nathaniel changed the subject before I could ask more questions. He told me he would be flying into Montana the next evening after meetings in Washington. I would like to see you in person, he said. If that is all right. I would like that too. After we hung up, I stood near the hotel window for a long time watching traffic move below through the falling snow. For days, I had felt like my life was shrinking smaller and smaller inside other people's pity. But now something was changing. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like sunlight returning after a storm. Around 7 that evening, another message appeared from Diane. But this time there was no fake sympathy in her words. Margaret, who exactly is Nathaniel Cole? I stared at the screen for several seconds before smiling to myself. Because for the first time since the fire, Diane sounded nervous. Nothing unsettles cruel people faster than realizing the person they underestimated has connections they cannot control. The next morning I woke up before sunrise inside soft white sheets that probably cost more than my first pickup truck. For a few quiet seconds, I simply listened to the silence. No motel ice machine rattling outside. No highway traffic. No feeling that somebody wanted me gone. Just warmth. Peace. Dignity. I had forgotten how much those things mattered. I made coffee slowly and stood beside the hotel window watching downtown Billings wake beneath fresh snow. Somewhere below, people hurried into offices carrying paper cups and briefcases while snowplows cleared intersections. Ordinary life continued even after your own world collapses. That lesson comes with age whether you want it or not. My phone buzzed again on the counter. Eric this time. 6 missed calls overnight. 3 messages. The latest one read, Mom, Please call us. Diane is upset. I stared at the screen for several seconds before quietly laughing to myself. Diane is upset. Not Diane is worried about you. Not Diane feels terrible for how she treated you. Just upset. There is a difference. I poured cream into my coffee and ignored the message. Around 10 that morning, the hotel concierge informed me that a package had arrived upstairs. Inside was a beautifully folded dark blue winter coat, leather gloves, and a handwritten note from Nathaniel. Chicago gets colder than Montana. You should practice. I shook my head smiling. Same dry humor. Same attention to details nobody else noticed. Beneath the note sat airline documents for a private flight scheduled later that afternoon. Destination, Chicago. I had never flown private in my entire life. Truthfully, I had barely flown at all. Harold hated airplanes and preferred long drives through open country instead. Before I could fully process anything, another notification appeared on my phone. Diane had posted again. This time it was a photograph of herself standing beside the burned remains of the farm, holding Tyler's hand while looking solemnly into the distance. The caption read, "Trying to stay strong while supporting family through tragedy." Supporting family. I nearly spilled my coffee laughing. But then I noticed something else. Hundreds of comments underneath asking about me. Where is Margaret staying? Did the grandmother lose her home? Why does she not stay with family? Diane stopped responding after those questions appeared. Interesting. 30 minutes later, Eric finally reached me directly. Mom, thank God, he exhaled immediately. We have been trying to contact you. I noticed. Silence stretched awkwardly between us. Then he cleared his throat. Diane heard you are leaving town. For a few days. With Nathaniel Cole. There it was. Not concern. Curiosity mixed with panic. Yes. Another pause. Mom, exactly how well do you know this guy? Guy. I almost smiled hearing my son refer to one of the most powerful businessmen in America like he was a mechanic from town. I helped raise him, I answered calmly. Eric let out a slow breath. Diane looked him up last night. Of course she did. I could practically picture her sitting awake in bed scrolling through articles about net worth, business acquisitions, and private jets while realizing she may have badly miscalculated the woman she called a burden. Apparently he is worth billions, Eric added carefully. Money does not change who people are, I replied quietly. But even as I said it, I knew that was only partly true. Money reveals people. That is what age teaches you. Poor people can hide selfishness behind struggle. Wealthy people can hide cruelty behind manners. But eventually power exposes character. Nathaniel had become one of the richest men in the country and still remembered a lonely farm woman who once made him cinnamon bread after school. That told me more about his character than any magazine article ever could. Eric suddenly lowered his voice. Mom, Diane feels like maybe there has been some misunderstanding lately. I almost laughed again. Misunderstanding. Such a clean little word for humiliation. Has there? I asked softly. He hesitated. She did not mean those things the way they sounded. The things about me being a burden? Silence. The things about selling my land? More silence. Or the videos she posted online while I was sleeping in a motel? His breathing changed slightly. Mom, you know how social media works. No, Eric, I answered quietly. I know how respect works. That sentence ended the conversation faster than yelling ever could have. After we hung up, I sat beside the hotel window thinking about my son. I did not hate him. That would have been easier somehow. What I felt instead was disappointment so deep it almost felt physical. Watching your child become weak around selfish people is a unique kind of heartbreak. Around noon, a black SUV arrived to take me to the airport. But before I left the hotel lobby, two women near the elevators suddenly whispered my name. One of them stepped forward carefully. Excuse me, are you Margaret from Diane Harper's videos? I froze slightly. The woman smiled warmly. I just wanted to say I am sorry for what happened to your farm. Real sympathy sounds different from performative sympathy. Softer. Human. I thanked her quietly and turned toward the entrance where the SUV waited outside. But the moment the driver opened my door, I noticed somebody standing across the street staring directly at me. Diane. Wearing oversized sunglasses and gripping her phone tightly in one hand. Even from half a block away, I could see panic written across her face. Because she was finally starting to understand something dangerous. The woman she tried to publicly pity was no longer standing alone. Power does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly on a private runway while the people who mistreated you watch from a distance, realizing they made a terrible mistake. I had never seen the inside of a private airport terminal before. Everything felt strangely calm compared to regular airports. No crowded security lines. No screaming announcements overhead. Just soft lighting, polished floors, and employees who somehow already knew my name before I introduced myself. Daniel carried my suitcase while another staff member handed me coffee in a porcelain cup instead of paper. Small details. But after spending days being treated like an inconvenience, every small kindness felt enormous. Outside the tall windows, a sleek white jet waited on the snowy runway with Cole Aviation written discreetly near the tail. I stared at it in disbelief. That is his? I asked quietly. Daniel smiled politely. One of them. One of them. I shook my head softly and followed him toward the aircraft. The inside looked less like a plane and more like an expensive living room. Cream leather seats. Warm lighting. Fresh flowers near a polished wood table. I kept thinking about Harold. He would have walked through that cabin muttering that nobody needed this much luxury just to travel. Then secretly enjoyed every second of it. As the plane lifted above Montana, I watched the snow-covered land disappear beneath the clouds. Somewhere down there sat the remains of my farm, still smelling of smoke and wet ash. But for the first time since the fire, the memory no longer crushed my chest the same way. Maybe because I was finally starting to understand something important. Losing your home hurts. Losing your dignity hurts worse. About 2 hours into the flight, my phone buzzed with another message from Diane. We need to talk privately before things get more complicated. Complicated. Interesting word choice from someone who had spent days treating me like a burden. A second message arrived immediately after. Eric says Nathaniel wants to help rebuild the farm. I did not answer either one. Instead, I looked out the plane window at endless clouds glowing gold beneath the afternoon sun. Somewhere along the way, silence had become my favorite form of power. We landed in Chicago just after sunset. I expected a driver and maybe another hotel. What I did not expect was Nathaniel himself standing on the private runway waiting beside a black SUV. For 1 second I simply stared at him. Time changes faces, but not presence. He was taller than I remembered, dressed in a dark wool coat with snowflakes collecting lightly in his hair while city lights reflected behind him. But his eyes were exactly the same. Calm. Observant. Kind in a way that never needed performance. The moment he saw me, his entire expression softened. Mrs. Whitmore. Before I could say anything, he walked forward and wrapped both arms around me gently. Not politely. Not formally. Like family. I cannot explain how deeply that affected me after days of feeling disposable. Look at you, I whispered emotionally as we stepped back. Nathaniel smiled. I was about to say the same thing. During the drive into the city, he asked questions about everything. The horses. The condition of the land. The insurance company. But I noticed something else too. Nathaniel listened differently than most people. Completely. Like every answer mattered. Wealth had not made him distracted the way it seemed to make everyone else these days. Chicago at night looked like another planet compared to rural Montana. Towers of glass and light stretched into the sky while snow drifted between traffic and glowing storefronts. When the SUV finally pulled into a private underground garage beneath a high-rise building downtown, I looked at Nathaniel carefully. You live here? He smiled slightly. Mostly when people are demanding things from me in New York. The elevator opened directly into his penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city while soft jazz played quietly somewhere in the background. Everything looked elegant without feeling cold. That surprised me most. Wealth often makes homes feel untouchable. Nathaniel's home still felt lived in. Comfortable. Human. Then I noticed something sitting on a bookshelf near the fireplace. An old faded photograph inside a silver frame. My breath caught immediately. It was our farm kitchen from 25 years ago. Harold standing beside the stove pretending to flip pancakes while teenage Nathaniel laughed in the background. And there I was beside them holding a mixing bowl. I walked closer slowly. "You kept this?" Nathaniel joined me near the shelf. That photo sat on every desk I ever owned. I looked up at him in shock. "Why?" He gave a quiet smile. "Because that was the first place I ever felt safe." The room fell silent after that. Outside, snow drifted across the Chicago skyline while warmth from the fireplace filled the apartment. Nathaniel eventually handed me a cup of tea before speaking again, more carefully this time. "There is something else you should know." The tone in his voice made my stomach tighten slightly. "My legal team reviewed the insurance documents this morning." I looked at him. "And?" Nathaniel paused briefly. "Your son increased the farm insurance coverage 6 weeks before the fire. The truth about betrayal is that your heart usually recognizes it long before your mind is willing to accept it." I sat motionless beside Nathaniel's fireplace while Chicago's snow drifted silently beyond the glass windows. His words repeated inside my head over and over. "Your son increased the farm insurance coverage 6 weeks before the fire." For several seconds, I could not speak at all. I simply stared down into my untouched tea while memories rearranged themselves painfully in my mind. Diane asking about insurance before asking if I was hurt. The printed property estimates spread across their kitchen counter. The sudden pressure to sell the land immediately after the fire. It all felt different now. Sharper. Colder. Nathaniel remained calm beside me, watching carefully without pushing too hard. Successful people learn patience because they understand timing matters more than noise. "Are you saying Eric caused the fire?" I finally whispered. Nathaniel shook his head immediately. "No. And I would never accuse someone without evidence." His voice stayed steady and professional. "But there are inconsistencies serious enough that my legal team flagged them." I pressed trembling fingers against my forehead. "What kind of inconsistencies?" Nathaniel leaned forward slightly. The insurance policy had remained unchanged for almost 12 years. Then suddenly the coverage amount doubled less than 2 months before the fire. My stomach tightened harder. "Eric handled most of the paperwork after Harold passed," I admitted quietly. Nathaniel nodded once. "There is more." He reached for a folder resting on the coffee table beside him. Inside were several printed documents covered with notes and highlighted sections. 3 weeks before the fire, he continued carefully, "A development company contacted your son about potentially purchasing sections of the land near the highway expansion project." I looked up sharply. "Highway expansion?" "The state approved a commercial expansion corridor last year," Nathaniel explained. "Property values around your farm increased significantly because of it." Suddenly Diane's obsession with acreage and market value made terrifying sense. They were not looking at my farm like family land anymore. They were looking at it like opportunity. A silence settled over the room while distant city lights reflected against the windows. Finally I spoke softly. "Harold would be heartbroken." Nathaniel's expression softened immediately. "I know." My eyes drifted again toward the old framed photograph sitting near the fireplace. Harold laughing beside the stove. Young Nathaniel smiling at the kitchen table. Back then life felt simple. Hard sometimes, but honest. Nobody measured people by what they could gain from them. Nathaniel carefully closed the folder again. "Margaret, I need you to understand something." I looked at him. "Whatever happened, you are not alone in this anymore." Those words nearly broke me. Because loneliness does not begin when people leave you. It begins when you realize the people closest to you stopped protecting your heart a long time ago. The next morning, everything changed publicly. I woke up to 23 missed calls and dozens of messages flooding my phone. At first I thought something terrible had happened. Then I opened one text from a church friend back in Montana. "Margaret, why are you on television?" I immediately turned on the news in the guest suite. There on screen stood Nathaniel outside a Chicago conference center surrounded by reporters. One journalist suddenly asked him about rumors linking him to a local Montana farm owner. Nathaniel could have ignored the question easily. Men at his level ignored uncomfortable questions every day. Instead, he answered calmly into the microphone. "Margaret Whitmore is family to me." Family. Just one sentence. But within hours the internet exploded. Reporters dug up old photos from charity events in Montana. Business articles started running stories about the farm woman who helped raise billionaire Nathaniel Cole. Meanwhile, Diane's sympathy videos began circulating for entirely different reasons. People noticed the comments, the staged captions, the way she discussed me like a burden instead of a person. Public opinion shifted fast. Faster than Diane could control. Around noon my phone rang again. "Eric." I answered this time. He sounded exhausted. "Mom, things are getting out of hand." Out of hand. Interesting phrase from a man who stayed silent while his wife humiliated his mother online. "People are attacking Diane everywhere," he continued. Someone posted old screenshots from her videos. I remained quiet. "Mom, please say something publicly," he begged softly. "People think we abandoned you." I closed my eyes briefly. Think. Did you? Silence. Long silence. Then his voice cracked slightly. "We were trying to help." "No," I answered quietly. "You were trying to manage me." He stopped speaking after that because deep down he knew I was right. Later that evening, Nathaniel invited several business associates and attorneys to the penthouse for dinner. I expected formal conversations and uncomfortable small talk. Instead, every single person treated me with warmth and respect. Not because I was connected to Nathaniel, but because he respected me first. That is another thing power reveals. Good people take their emotional cues from character. Weak people take them from status. Near the end of dinner, one of Nathaniel's attorneys approached him quietly and handed over another document folder. Nathaniel scanned the first page before his entire expression changed slightly. Calm. Focused. Dangerous in a very quiet way. He looked toward me across the dining table. "Margaret," he said carefully, "I think we just discovered who started the fire. The people who betray you always believe they will control the ending of the story. What they never expect is surviving long enough to watch the truth walk calmly into the room." The dining table inside Nathaniel's penthouse fell completely silent after his attorney handed him the folder. Snow drifted slowly beyond the massive windows while warm candlelight reflected across crystal glasses and polished silverware. Everything looked elegant, peaceful. But the expression on Nathaniel's face told me something serious had just changed. He opened the folder carefully, scanning several pages before looking directly at me. "Margaret," he said quietly, "the fire investigation team recovered surveillance footage from a gas station 2 miles from your property." My chest tightened instantly. "And?" Nathaniel paused briefly. "Eric's truck was seen there less than 40 minutes before the fire started." The room felt suddenly smaller around me. I stared at him, unable to speak. One of the attorneys gently stepped in. "To be clear, Mrs. Whitmore, this does not prove intent. But combined with the insurance increase, the property negotiations, and several financial records we uncovered today," he stopped carefully. He did not need to finish the sentence. I closed my eyes slowly. Somewhere deep inside me, a mother's instinct still wanted to defend her son. But another part of me already knew the truth. Not necessarily that Eric planned something terrible himself. Weak people rarely create destruction alone. They simply stand beside selfish people long enough to let it happen. Nathaniel moved closer and lowered his voice. "You do not have to face this tonight." But strangely, I already felt calmer than I had in days. Painful truth hurts less than humiliating confusion. "I want to go home," I whispered finally. Nathaniel nodded once. "Then we will go home." 3 days later, a charity gala took place back in Montana at the newly renovated Grand Heritage Hall downtown. Officially, the event celebrated rural rebuilding efforts after winter fire damage across the county. Unofficially, everyone knew Nathaniel Cole was attending because of me. Local reporters crowded outside the entrance while luxury vehicles lined the snowy streets. The same town that watched Diane's sympathy videos now buzzed with rumors about billionaires, investigations, and Whitmore Farm. Nathaniel had invited me personally to attend beside him that evening. At first I refused. I did not own gowns or diamonds, or any of the things women usually wore to events like that. Nathaniel simply smiled and said, "Margaret, dignity was always the most elegant thing about you." So I went. The dress his assistant selected for me was dark emerald green with long sleeves and simple pearl earrings. Nothing flashy. Nothing desperate. Just graceful. When I stepped out of the car beside Nathaniel, camera flashes exploded across the entrance. But the most shocking moment came when the crowd suddenly parted and I saw Eric and Diane standing near the ballroom doors. Diane looked pale beneath heavy makeup. Her smile appeared stretched too tightly, like she practiced it in a mirror all afternoon. Eric looked exhausted. Guilty people always do eventually. "Mom," he said quickly as we approached. "Can we talk privately?" Nathaniel remained calm beside me, one hand resting respectfully behind my back without saying a word. Diane stepped forward before I could answer. "Margaret, there has been so much misunderstanding." Misunderstanding again. Amazing how selfish people always search for softer words once consequences arrive. I looked at her quietly. "You called me a burden online while I slept in a motel." Her face immediately flushed red. "I never meant you recorded my grief for attention," I continued softly. "You discussed selling my home before the smoke had even cleared." Eric lowered his head while Diane's expression hardened slightly beneath the embarrassment. There it was. The real version of her. Not remorse. Frustration that public sympathy no longer belonged to her. Before either of them could answer, ballroom doors opened and reporters began calling Nathaniel's name. The event coordinator approached nervously. "Mr. Cole, they are ready for your speech." Nathaniel glanced toward me. "Would you join me?" My heartbeat quickened slightly, but I nodded. Inside the ballroom, hundreds of people filled round tables beneath crystal chandeliers. Local officials, business leaders, families from surrounding counties. Conversations slowly faded as Nathaniel stepped onto the stage beside me. He adjusted the microphone calmly while cameras flashed across the room. "Most people believe success is built by ambition," he began smoothly. "But sometimes success begins much earlier than that. Sometimes it begins in the kitchen of a small farmhouse where a woman decides a lonely child deserves warmth, structure, and kindness." The room fell completely silent. Nathaniel looked toward me with genuine affection before continuing. "Everything I became started because Margaret Whitmore treated me like family long before I earned anything." I felt tears burn behind my eyes while people throughout the ballroom listened quietly. Then Nathaniel's tone shifted slightly. Colder. Sharper. "Unfortunately," he continued, "some people mistake kindness for weakness. They believe older people become disposable once inconvenience enters the conversation." Across the ballroom, Diane's face lost all color. "But character eventually reveals itself," Nathaniel said calmly. "Especially during difficult times." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The silence itself became unbearable. Then something unexpected happened. One by one, people throughout the ballroom slowly stood to their feet. Applause filled the entire hall while reporters turned their cameras toward me instead of Diane for the first time since the fire. I looked across the crowd and saw Eric standing completely still beside his wife. Not angry. Not defensive. Just ashamed. And in that moment, I finally understood something age had spent years trying to teach me. Blood may create relatives, but loyalty is what creates family.